Okay, now we're going to talk about what can go wrong in the circuit and what you can do about it, and then we'll talk last about the circuit around this 6AT6, which is part of the grid emission test circuit. First, what are the things that are likely to go wrong? Well, if you have a tube tester that you've just bought and you don't know anything about it, there's a good chance that the reason you got it for the low price you probably paid for it on eBay is that one or more of the transformer windings are bad. Well, a way to check that, of course, is you first use an ohm meter to make sure that the fuse is good and that the primary is good. Then you can check the heater winding, the way I told you earlier, by setting it to the 50 volt position and looking for 18 or so ohms across pins 3 and 4. By the way, those pins are the pins that are shown in the BK service manual, and I've drawn them here in my copy. If the meter is down in the lower right hand corner and this panel, called the bridge panel, is flopped over as it would be if you're looking at the underside, this is the way that you would read. In other words, the meter is at the bottom. Pin 1 will be at your lower right, and then 2 through 10. Pin 11 starts on the lower left and goes up to pin 20. 19 and 20 are the AC line, which are up there, and then correspondingly further down. So what can go wrong? Suppose that the heaters are working, but you just can't get anything out of the tester. Well, one of the most vexing problems with this particular tester are those number 55 bulbs right there. The reason is, not only do they sometimes burn out, not very often, but much more often they oxidize, and they are in bayonet sockets. Anything in a bayonet socket is likely to oxidize over time. So one of the first things you have to do is check those 55 bulbs. If one of them is not making good contact, or worse, is burned out, the meter will probably read negative. In other words, will try to swing down when you try to move it into the test 1 position instead of up. If you ever see the meter swing down, by the way, that's just static electricity. My finger is charged. But if the meter swings down when you put it in the test position, you can be almost certain it's one of those 55 bulbs. The second problem, of course, is the meter by itself might be burned out. But more likely, what is wrong with it is the bearings have gone bad. These bearings are very sensitive, and they are mounted to a couple of very, very fine springs. So it's a pretty delicate instrument, actually, and a lot of them are bent or broken by people either mishandling the meter, or in some cases by people who try to fix the meter and aren't exactly jewelers, if you know what I mean. The next problem is the 83 rectifier. It's a mercury vapor rectifier, and a lot of people replace those with silicon diodes. I'm going to actually do that in this tester, and I've got some sockets on order to replace that, and I'll show that in a subsequent video. But even if the 83 is working, and they're getting pretty rare these days, they're pretty expensive, there's a good chance that it's not very well balanced. In other words, one side conducts a lot more than the other side. Well, of course, the whole point of this circuit that is called the Hickok circuit, by the way, it wasn't Hickok that invented this, it was actually one of his workers who invented this circuit. But one of the reasons that this circuit works is that rectifier has to be reasonably well balanced. So if your 83 is not very well balanced, you'll have to find one that is, or replace it with silicon diodes. Now, one of the anomalies about this particular tester is nowhere on this panel, all these tube sockets, not a single one will test a type 83 tube. Of course, you couldn't test it anyway if you pulled the 83 out, but you're going to need a tester like this one. This is a Hickok. Now, you don't need one as fancy as this to test an 83, but you do need one that has a 4-pin socket, because that is what an 83 uses, and only a tester with that kind of capability will test a type 83 tube. All you're really interested in is roughly equal emission on both sides of the diode. If you have that, you can probably make it work, because there is an adjustment, which is right there, that allows you to adjust the balance. That is R4, the 20 ohm resistor. So you can adjust this point up and down to account for mismatch up to a point. Obviously, if one side is practically dead and the other side is good and hot, you won't be able to do that. Now let's talk about this 6AT6. I've kind of left it for last because this is another novel feature of the B&K testers. This is the way they test for grid emission. Now, grid emission can occur either because of grid emission itself, which is when cathode material winds up deposited on the grid. In other words, it boils off the cathode into free space, lands on the grid, and sticks. Then the grid starts to emit electrons. Well, those electrons come up from the grid resistor. So this is how B&K tests that. They connect the tube under test to a 6AT6, and they have a 5.6 meg resistor. That's a big grid resistor. They balance the 6AT6, that is, they adjust the bias on the 6AT6 until it is just cut off. That means the meter will read 0. Like that. But when you plug in the tube under test, if there's any grid emission, or if there's any gas in the tube that causes ions to gather around that grid and suck electrons out of the grid, either way, these electrons will come from that negative bias supply up to that 5.6 meg resistor. That will make this junction much more positive than it was before, and that will turn on the 6AT6 and the meter will swing upscale. So in the shorts grid emission position, shorts will be indicated on that neon bulb. And when we go to calibrate this unit, I'll show you how you test that to make sure that it's working correctly. Grid emission is indicated on the meter by swinging up this scale, and almost anything above that first little bit of green there means that it's a reject. That's why it reads grid emission reject. Okay, now let's move on